Evan dragged his feet along the crowded city streets, shoulders slouched, hands buried in his pockets. It was nearly Christmas Eve, and the city was alive with lights, laughter, and the jingling of bells. But for Evan, each cheerful sound seemed to emphasize his own loneliness. He watched families pass by, laughing children tugging at their parents, couples huddled close in the winter chill. His chest tightened with a hollow feeling he couldn't shake. Life had not turned out as he'd hoped. His job was mind-numbing, a desk in a cramped office where he shuffled papers from one pile to another. Promotions and praise seemed to pass him by, like he was invisible. His friends had slowly drifted away, their lives filled with new priorities, busy schedules, and fresh adventures. And his family, well, they loved him. But their words were full of unspoken expectations. "You could be doing more," they'd say, or, "Why don't you try something new, Evan?" Lately, he had started to wonder if his presence made any difference at all. Maybe, he thought, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. If I weren't around, nothing would change. Maybe the world would be better without me. The thought lingered, both painful and strangely comforting. What if he had never been born? Evan found himself wandering toward a small park on the edge of the city, away from the crowds and holiday cheer. He sat on an old, snow-dusted bench under a street lamp, its light casting a warm glow in the night. The city buzzed distantly in the background, but here it was quiet. His heart felt heavy as he closed his eyes, letting his mind drift. The words he couldn't say aloud echoed softly in his head. I don't matter. Eventually, Evan forced himself to his feet, his legs feeling leaden as he made his way back to his small apartment. The rooms were dark and silent, with only a single lamp casting a faint glow. He slipped off his coat, kicked off his shoes, and dropped onto the bed, too exhausted to even undress. His eyes closed almost immediately, his mind foggy with weariness. And as he drifted into sleep, something strange happened. The darkness behind his eyelids shifted, forming shapes and colors. He felt a peculiar warmth, a sensation almost like someone was calling to him from somewhere far away. In his dream, he found himself standing in an unfamiliar place, and before him was a stranger with a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to hold secrets he couldn't understand. "Hello, Evan," the figure said in a voice that was both kind and mysterious. "I think it's time you saw things from a different perspective." And with that, Evan's journey into a strange and life-changing dream began. In his dream, Evan found himself standing in a soft, misty light that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. He looked down and realized he was no longer in his worn-out work clothes, but instead wrapped in a warm, comforting robe. The mist swirled gently, and he felt a strange sense of peace, like everything around him was waiting for something to happen. Then, from the fog, a figure appeared. A tall, kind-faced man with sparkling eyes and a gentle smile. He wore a simple cloak and walked toward Evan with an air of quiet wisdom. As he came closer, Evan felt oddly reassured, as though he were meeting an old friend. "Hello, Evan," the man said in a warm, familiar voice. Evan blinked in surprise. Hi?" He glanced around, confused. "Where am I? And who are you?" The man chuckled softly, his voice carrying an echo of kindness. "I know you're a bit lost, Evan. Let's just say I'm here to help you see things differently. You may think of me as your guide, a sort of guardian angel if that's easier." Evan gave a skeptical half-smile, running a hand through his hair. "A guardian angel? Really? I didn't know I had one." "Oh, you'd be surprised," the guide replied with a twinkle in his eye. "Everyone has a purpose, Evan, even if it's not always clear. And you, my friend, have been feeling, how shall we say, a little lost?" Evan let out a weary sigh, the weight of his thoughts returning. "Yeah, that's an understatement. I feel like I don't matter. Like if I had never been born, the world would be the same, maybe even better." The guide nodded thoughtfully, as though he'd been expecting this. "I thought you might feel that way," he said softly. That's why I'm here, Evan. I can show you a world where you were never born. No one has memories of you. No one knows you ever existed. And well, you'll be able to see what things would be like without you in them." Evan's heart skipped a beat. The idea was both terrifying and fascinating. Could it really be possible? Would it finally prove to him that he was right, that his life truly made no difference? But there was also a glimmer of curiosity deep inside him, one that urged him to take this chance, to see this strange new world his guide was offering. "All right," Evan said, taking a deep breath. "Show me. I want to see it, the world without me." The guide's face softened, and he placed a gentle hand on Evan's shoulder. "Very well," he said, his tone gentle yet serious. "But remember, what you're about to see isn't meant to bring you pain. It's to show you the truth. Your truth." With a quiet nod, Evan steadied himself, feeling both fear and excitement bubble within him. The mist around them began to swirl faster, and soon the familiar city skyline faded into view. Only, something was different. The world he knew so well was about to become unrecognizable in ways he could never have imagined. Evan blinked, and suddenly he found himself standing on the corner of his own street. It looked exactly like the neighborhood he knew, same apartment buildings, same little grocery store on the corner. But something was off. There was a strange emptiness, as if the warmth and color of life had been dialed down just a notch. "Welcome to a world where you don't exist, Evan," the guide said, standing beside him, his voice gentle. "Remember, no one here knows you. You were never here to make an impact, to lend a hand, or to share a laugh." Evan felt a pang of nervousness as he looked around. It all looked the same, and yet, it was different in subtle ways he couldn't quite put into words. He turned toward the modest, cozy apartment building where he'd spent the last few years. In the lobby, he saw Mrs. Grant, the elderly lady he used to help with her groceries. She was slowly struggling with a heavy bag, her face lined with more worry and exhaustion than he remembered. Instinctively, he took a step forward to help her, but the guide placed a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him. "Remember, Evan," he said quietly. "Here, you don't exist. She won't see you." Evan watched helplessly as Mrs. Grant struggled alone, her eyes tired and sad. He remembered the countless times he'd carried her bags up the stairs, how she'd thank him with a warm smile and a homemade cookie. Now, without him, she seemed frail and lonely. They moved on, and soon Evan found himself in front of the community center where he'd volunteered every weekend, helping run events for local kids and families. The building looked different, too. Dark, the lights off, and the doors closed. A faded sign on the front door read, "Closed due to lack of volunteers." Evan's heart sank. He remembered how vibrant this place used to be, full of laughter and life. Kids from the neighborhood had come here to play, make friends, and learn. Without his help, it seemed the community center had shut down, leaving the kids with one less safe and happy space to enjoy. They moved on, and Evan found himself outside the office building where his best friend Jake worked. Jake had been going through a rough time last year, feeling unmotivated and overwhelmed with his job. Evan had spent hours listening to him, encouraging him not to give up. With his support, Jake had started seeing a therapist and even got a promotion. But now, as Evan peered through the office windows, he saw a different version of Jake, one with slouched shoulders and a vacant, tired expression. It looked as though he hadn't slept in days. Instead of laughing with his colleagues, Jake sat alone, looking drained and defeated. Evan's chest tightened as he realized how much his small actions, things he'd thought were unimportant, had actually mattered. The kindness he'd shown, the support he'd given, had changed lives in ways he'd never seen. The guide gave him a knowing look. "Even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple through people's lives, Evan," he said softly. "A world without you may seem the same on the surface, but beneath it, people have lost pieces of warmth and strength that you unknowingly gave them." Evan swallowed, his throat tight with emotion. He looked around at this world that was both familiar and deeply unsettling. In each face he recognized, there was a hint of sadness, a missing spark. He hadn't realized just how much his presence meant to others. Evan felt a rush of air, and suddenly the strange, empty version of his world vanished. He was back in his own apartment, standing in the quiet of his living room. The familiar sight of his belongings brought a comforting sense of normalcy, yet everything felt different. The guide was there beside him, watching him with an understanding smile. "You're back, Evan," the guide said gently. "This is your life, the life where you do exist." Evan looked around, still shaken by everything he'd seen. Before he could say anything, the guide gestured toward his phone, resting on the small table by the door. "You may have missed some things," he said, motioning for Evan to check it. Evan picked up the phone, and to his surprise, it was full of unread messages. One was from Jake, his best friend, thanking him for always being there to listen. "Couldn't have gotten through the last year without you, man," Jake had written. "You're like a brother to me." A warmth spread through Evan's chest as he read the message. He clicked through to another text, this one from Sarah, a friend from his volunteer work. "Thanks for helping out at the center all those weekends. The kids really miss you when you're not around." She'd attached a picture of the kids smiling and waving, their faces filled with joy. The guide nodded toward Evan's bedroom, as if urging him to go inside. Curious, Evan opened the door and stepped into his small, neatly kept room. On the shelf above his bed, he saw something he'd almost forgotten about, a small handmade card with "Thank you, Evan," written in big, colorful letters. It was from Mrs. Grant, the elderly neighbor he often helped. She'd once given it to him as a token of appreciation, and he'd put it on the shelf without much thought. Next to the card was a little photo frame that he hadn't looked at in ages. It held a picture of him with his family, all smiling together on his last birthday. His mother, his father, and his sister were all crowded around him, their faces beaming with pride and love. Suddenly, he remembered how his mom would always tell him that he brought so much joy to their family. He felt a pang of guilt for doubting his own worth, realizing he'd been blind to how much he meant to them. Then he noticed a small box on the edge of his bed. He opened it and found inside a collection of little keepsakes he'd given his mother over the years. Handmade cards, tiny trinkets, even a clumsy drawing he'd made as a child. She had saved them all. Evan took a deep breath, a mixture of emotions swirling inside him. The memories, the heartfelt messages, the little tokens of appreciation, all of them reminded him of the impact he'd unknowingly had on people's lives. He thought of Jake, Mrs. Grant, the kids at the community center, his family, all the people who saw him as a light, as a friend, as someone who cared. Looking back at the guide, Evan's eyes filled with gratitude. "I never realized. I didn't think any of this mattered," he said, his voice catching. "I thought I was just invisible." The guide smiled warmly. "Sometimes, Evan, it's hard to see our own value. But even the smallest acts of kindness leave ripples in the lives of others. You don't have to be extraordinary to make a difference. You just have to be yourself." Evan felt a deep sense of peace, as though a weight had lifted from his shoulders. The emptiness he'd felt before was gone, replaced by a warmth that filled his heart. His life mattered. His kindness, his presence, his friendship, all of it had made a difference. As the guide's figure began to fade, Evan realized he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by people who loved him, people whose lives were richer because he was in them. And in that moment, Evan knew that he would carry this understanding with him forever. Evan woke with a start, his heart pounding as he sat up in bed, blinking in the early morning light. For a moment, he wasn't sure if everything he'd experienced had been real, or just an incredibly vivid dream. But the warmth and certainty filling his chest felt undeniable. The memories of his strange journey with the guide were as clear as if they'd truly happened. He looked around his room, the familiar sight of his belongings now carrying a newfound significance. Each item, each memory reminded him that his life was part of something bigger than he had ever realized. Smiling, Evan got up, feeling a surge of energy he hadn't felt in a long time. That day, he went to work with a different attitude. Instead of letting his routine tasks drain him, he took them as chances to connect with those around him. He greeted his coworkers with a smile, stopped to chat with a new employee who looked a bit lost, and offered to help a colleague struggling with a deadline. Each small action felt like a little light he was passing along, and he found himself genuinely enjoying the day. At lunch, he checked in on his friend Jake, asking how he was doing. Jake's face lit up, and they ended up having a deep, honest conversation that left both of them feeling more connected and supported. Evan realized that just being there and listening to his friend was enough. He didn't need to do anything heroic to make a difference. After work, Evan made his way to the community center. He signed up for a few new volunteer shifts, smiling as he saw the familiar faces of the kids and families he'd missed. The laughter and warmth in the center were back, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose as he joined in to help organize a holiday event. Later that evening, Evan visited his parents, bringing along a simple gift for his mom and dad, a little framed photo of them all together. His mother's face softened as she looked at it, her eyes shining with love and gratitude. Evan felt a lump in his throat as he hugged her, realizing that sometimes just being present with his loved ones was enough to show them how much he cared. Over the following weeks, Evan continued his journey with quiet determination. Life was still full of challenges, work was demanding, friendships took effort, and family responsibilities sometimes weighed on him. But he had a newfound sense of purpose, a strength that came from knowing he didn't have to change the world in grand ways. Every kind word, every small gesture, every shared moment was enough. Evan had become, in his own way, a guardian angel to those around him. And though they might never realize it, he knew his life made a difference, leaving a ripple of kindness and care wherever he went. As the holiday season came to a close, Evan sat by his window, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for his life, his loved ones, and his place in the world. He no longer questioned his worth or wondered if he mattered. He knew, with quiet confidence, that his presence was his own unique gift to the world.